friends, my name is Katya. This is Kat Reads a Lot. Welcome back to my channel. So as I'm filming this, it is currently October 22nd, which I know is a little late to be posting a fall recommendations video, just because I feel like everybody who's going to post a fall reading recommendations video has probably already posted it, but I wanted to throw my hat in the ring and get my recommendations out there as well. I tend to gravitate towards like cozier kind of books that make you think in this season. I'm not one for thrillers or horror. So I wanted to take some time today to recommend a few of my favorite like cozy, introspective books for fall in case you are looking for a similar kind of thing. I did do a video like this last year. In case you're interested, I'll link that video up in the cards. I totally stand by all of those recommendations, but I wanted to offer a few more. To be completely honest, this video is mostly just me like hanging on as hard as I can to fall because it doesn't feel like fall to me anymore here in Minnesota. I'm looking outside and there is snow everywhere. It's a winter wonderland. We got 9 inches 2 days ago and I don't think that it's gonna melt away. So I think we're gonna have snow from here until December at least, and it makes me sad because fall was even shorter than usual this year. So this video is basically me doing all I can to hold on to autumn by recommending fall books, but also just to let you know, since I've been crafting my winter recommendations already, keep your eye out for that video within the next few weeks. The first book that I want to talk about is a literary thriller by my favorite author, and that is Celeste Ng, and the book is Everything I Never Told You. This book follows the Lee family, and in the very first chapter we find out that Lydia Lee has died. The book focuses on the Lee family as they try to find out what happened to Lydia, as well as them dealing with their grief over her death, as well as them dealing with a whole myriad of other issues. It's very much a character-driven story. There's lots of development in these characters, and I think that their relationships are so complex and fascinating. I love reading really well-developed characters, and I think that Celeste Ng does it so well. She also has a very sort of like atmospheric writing style that's still very readable. I read this book so quickly, but I really felt like I was there in this sort of like very like somber environment, and I think that it's a perfect sort of book for the fall. The story is so gripping, but it's also so touching, and I just think that Celeste Ng did a phenomenal job studying this family and developing these characters, and I think it's phenomenal for the fall. Next, I want to touch on a few historical fiction novels. The first is going to be All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. This is a book that I have had on my shelf for the past, I want to say like 5 years. I bought it very close to when it came out, and I just let it sit on my shelf because I was so intimidated by it. I would read a little bit of it, but it was so slow moving, I couldn't really get into it. But earlier this year with quarantine, I was like, now that I have all of this free time, I really would like to finally read this book, and I'm so glad that I did. All the Light We Cannot See is a World War II historical fiction, and we follow 2 characters, Marie-Laure and Werner. Werner is a young boy living in Germany who ends up enrolled in a Nazi academy, and Marie-Laure is a young blind girl living in Paris, I believe, although she moves to a different part of France throughout the book. So we follow both of these characters across the span of many years, starting at their childhood, and at first their paths are very different and you don't think that they'd intersect, but they end up intersecting in a really fascinating, moving, heart-wrenching way by the end of the book. This book is very slow moving, but there's so much intricacy and depth to the story. There are so many tiny threads and details that you don't think are going to matter that end up mattering so much by the end of the book, and it's just absolutely breathtaking, and I highly recommend it. I just think that it's a book that requires some patience, but it does absolutely pay off by the end of the book. Next, I wanted to mention Lovely War by Julie Berry. I think this book is perfect for the fall because this is a book that blends 2 very different genres. It blends historical fiction and fantasy. Fantasy because it focuses on Greek gods, and historical fiction because it takes place during World War I. So this book basically follows 2 different couples over the course of World War I, but the story of their romances are being told by Aphrodite to Hephaestus and Ares. I thought this book was really imaginative, really beautiful. I really felt for all of the characters in the story. I did feel that it got a little cheesy towards the end, but I do definitely recommend it if you like historical fiction and you like Greek mythology and you're looking for a book that will combine those things, I really, really enjoyed it. And I also enjoyed reading about World War I because I feel like typically when I'm reading historical fiction, I tend to read World War II historical fiction. Next, I want to talk about The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. I actually don't know if this is set during autumn, but I do know that it's set during the school year, and school makes me think of fall, and that cover has those really gorgeous autumn colors that I think are perfect for this time of year. And this book is just really great in general, so I could recommend it no matter the season, but I might as well recommend it now. This is a YA contemporary about our main character, Xiomara, who is a young girl living in Harlem, I believe, and throughout the book she becomes really infatuated with slam poetry, and she discovers that she has a talent and a passion for writing slam poetry, and through the book she uses her poetry to kind of come to understand herself, her relationship with her friends, and particularly her relationship with her mother. Her mother is very, very religious, very staunchly Catholic. Xiomara has a very complicated relationship with the church and with her mother, and so she pours all of her frustrations into her poems, and that ends up helping her to understand her life. This book is so beautiful, and I think that it was particularly impactful for me as someone who has been Catholic her whole life. I just think that there are some scenes that really resonated with me, and there were some scenes that made me remember particular instances in my life. And I think this book did a really good job of sort of explaining why Xiomara would want to move away from religion, especially because I'm somebody who is very Catholic and I very value my relationship with Jesus, but like I can totally understand from this book why Xiomara would not feel like it was a good environment for her. I think it's a really gorgeous book. This book is also written in verse, and so it is so quick to get through. I think I read it in maybe 1 or 2 hours, but those 1 or 2 hours were filled with so much emotional impact. I just highly, highly recommend it. Next, I wanted to talk about The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. This book is delightful. It's whimsical, it's imaginative, it's immersive, and I really, really enjoyed it. This is a much more uplifting book than most of the ones that I've talked about so far, and I think that it's perfect, particularly for October, but really any time of the year. Follow our main character, Linus Baker, who is a social worker, and he works with magical children. So he visits different orphanages and homes and basically makes sure that all of the rules are being followed and the children are being treated well. And at the beginning of the book, Linus is approached by upper management about a very special assignment. So Linus is sent to the House in the Cerulean Sea, which is a home for particularly dangerous magical children. They're either children who are very, very powerful, or they're the last of their kind, or in one case they're the Antichrist. And so Linus is very freaked out about this assignment, but he's like, yeah, I'll go and do it. So he stays in this house for 30 days where he meets and bonds with these magical children as well as their caretaker, Arthur. I think the main reason that this book is so great for the fall is because it features these sort of like monstrous magical children, and because it has this element of fantasy but also an element of like coziness and happiness that sometimes you just need when it's really dark and stormy and gloomy outside. You need something that's gonna lift your spirits, and this is the book to do that. This is a book that made me cry happy tears. It features some really cute, hilarious children. It features some really gorgeous writing and quotes, and the message at the core of the story is very much about like choosing your own path and about how you don't have to be what other people immediately label you to be. Even if you're labeled a monstrous child or like a bad person, you don't have to be what other people say. You can make your own decisions about your life and about choosing goodness, and I just thought it was such a gorgeous message, and I really loved this book and I highly recommend it. This is another one that gets a little bit cheesy, but sometimes you need that sort of thing, especially when it's gloomy outside. All right, my camera is dying, but I very quickly wanted to mention 2 more recommendations, both of which are fantasy, but both of which are very, very different from one another. The first is going to be one that has received so much hype and praise. It was recently added to the Time 100 Best Fantasy Novels list, and that is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I am so sure that you have definitely heard of this book, but if you haven't, I this is me giving it my endorsement. It's also a great book to be picking up right now because the third and final book of the trilogy comes out in late November. So you can catch up with the series before the last book comes out and just marathon them all. Although I will say that these are pretty heavy books to marathon, so maybe you don't want to marathon it. Anyway, this book is based in a Asian-inspired fantasy setting, and we follow our main character, Rin. And at the very beginning of the first book, Rin tests into this very prestigious military academy. So the first half of the book is all about Rin enrolling in this school and So the first half of the book is about Rin enrolling in this school and getting to know her classmates and developing relationships and dealing with the prejudice that many people have against her because of her poor background and because of her skin color, and just in general it's about Rin moving to a new environment and sort of like trying to lift herself out of poverty. But the second half of the book really focuses on a war. So the two halves of the book are very distinct, and although the first half of the book definitely has a dark tone, it just gets darker and darker and more intense as the book goes on. And in that second half of the book, Rin and her previously fellow classmates, now fellow soldiers, are all sort of just forced to re-examine their priorities and realize that even though they didn't get along before, like they have to get along now because they are fighting in a war. This book is complex and shocking, and I think that R.F. Kuang had a lot of things to say about the cost and the horrors of war, and she really doesn't shy away from that. So it's definitely a book that can be difficult to read, but in general I think that it's just a really, really well done fantasy, and if it seems like something that's going to interest you, I highly recommend it. The other fantasy that I wanted to recommend is, again, like I said, very different from the Poppy War. It's a middle grade fantasy, and that is Gregor the Overlander by Suzanne Collins. This was Suzanne Collins' fantasy series that she wrote before she wrote The Hunger Games, and it follows our main character Gregor, who lives in an apartment in New York City. And one day he and his young sister, I think she's like 3 years old, fall down a hole and end up in this underground world that they call the Underland. So Gregor the Overlander is what everybody down there calls him. So it's about his and his sister's adventures down in the Underland. They end up meeting a lot of rats and bats and cockroaches, as well as this kingdom of humans who has been living underground for hundreds of years. And in general, I think all of the like creepy creatures that Gregor encounters down in the Underland are really perfect to read about in October and in the fall season. It's a very imaginative, vivid setting, and I really, really enjoyed reading about it. I also really enjoyed the themes that Suzanne Collins ties throughout this book, because even though the setting and the characters in this book are so different from her Hunger Games series, I do think that it's really interesting to sort of notice the parallels in themes that Suzanne Collins likes to explore. And so I highly recommend this book for the fall. Since it's a middle grade, it's really quick and easy to read, and I especially recommend it if, like me, you're a fan of Suzanne Collins. Alright, that is all the books that I was planning on talking about in this video today. Let me know if you have any autumn recommendations for me based on this list that you think that I would enjoy. Also, don't forget to check out my autumn recommendations video from last year in case you're looking for more books to read throughout the rest of October and November. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate you. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in my next video. I hope you have a lovely day.